Skylar Brennan kept her gaze fixed on the packed earth beneath her boots, while Lena's voice cut through the gathering grounds of Hollow Ridge. The entire pack had assembled to witness her public shaming, their faces a mixture of vindication and carefully concealed satisfaction. She'd known this confrontation would come eventually. Nothing good in her life had ever been permitted to survive scrutiny. "Tell them," Lena demanded, circling Skylar like a predator savoring the kill. "Tell them how you gave yourself to a drifter who wandered into our territory 4 months ago with nothing but worn tools and empty pockets. How you disgraced your bloodline by bonding yourself to him under the moon without permission, without witnesses, without even consulting the pack elders." The murmurs erupted immediately, hand-fasting, the old way. Primitive and binding, recognized by wolf law but scorned by proper society. Skylar felt heat crawl up her neck, staining her cheeks, but she refused to give Lena the satisfaction of seeing her break. She'd learned long ago that tears only made cruelty sharper, more cutting. "Where is this craftsman of yours?" someone called from the assembled wolves. "Did he finally run when things got complicated, when being with you stopped being convenient?" But then the crowd began to part, and Skylar's heart stuttered in her chest. She knew his footsteps, steady, unhurried, carrying a weight that seemed to shift the very air. Caleb moved through the hostile gathering with his shoulders squared, his dark hair falling loose past his shoulders, his weathered traveling cloak dust-covered from the road. He looked every inch the wandering tradesman they believed him to be: simple brown cloak, worn leather boots, calloused hands marked by honest labor. To anyone watching, he was nobody, a man with nothing to offer except skills and quiet promises. But when his golden eyes found hers across the gathered wolves, Skylar saw something that made her chest ache with fierce certainty. She saw the man who'd repaired her family's crumbling home without asking for payment, who'd carried water buckets when her hands bled raw from the rope, who'd sat with her beneath starlight and made her believe she deserved happiness. She saw the man who'd made her feel worthy again. "So you came back," Lena said, her voice dripping false surprise. "I half expected you to be miles away by now. That's what men like you do when reality intrudes on fantasy, isn't it? When the game stops being amusing?" Caleb didn't answer immediately. He walked straight to where Skylar stood frozen and extended his hand to her, palm up, steady as stone. "Stand up," he said quietly, his voice carrying an authority that seemed incongruous coming from a man in travel-stained clothes. "You don't bow to anyone." Skylar stared at his outstretched hand, scarred from work, strong, unwavering, and felt something crack open inside her chest. Slowly she placed her hand in his and let him pull her upright. His grip was warm, grounding, real. The pack murmured uneasily, sensing this wasn't unfolding according to Lena's carefully orchestrated script. "I came to speak with you about Skylar," Caleb said, turning to face Lena directly. His voice carried weight that seemed out of place for a wanderer in borrowed lodgings. "Though I see you've decided public humiliation is more appropriate than private conversation." "Public disgrace deserves public consequences," Lena snapped, her beautiful face hardening. "You seduced her. You took advantage of her family's circumstances and her desperate need for validation. You knew exactly what you were doing." "I asked her to bond with me," Caleb said calmly. "She said yes. We were handfasted 6 nights ago under the full moon with the traditional words spoken. I understand that's not how things are typically done in modern packs, but where I come from, the moon's blessing carries more weight than political convenience." The whispers intensified, rippling through the gathered wolves like wind through tall grass. Handfasting was ancient, rarely practiced except in the most isolated territories. Legally binding among wolves, but considered barbaric by civilized standards. "Where you come from," Lena repeated mockingly, taking a step closer. "And where exactly is that? You've been here for months without revealing your history, your family, or why a man your age wanders alone with no pack ties. For all we know, you're a criminal, a deserter, a wolf running from something." Elder Thomas stepped forward, his weathered face grave with manufactured concern. "These are reasonable questions, Caleb. You can understand our caution. A stranger arrives, wins the trust of one of our own, and binds himself to her through ancient ritual that bypasses all modern protections and protocols. It raises concerns." Skylar's younger brother Evan pushed through the crowd, his face flushed with emotion. "Just tell us something real about yourself. Give us a reason to believe you're not using her." Caleb's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his voice remained steady, controlled. "I'm neither a criminal nor a deserter. I'm simply a man who recognized something worth protecting when he found it." "How convenient," Lena said coldly. "Vague enough to sound noble without actually telling us anything. What family do you come from? What pack holds your loyalty? Why were you alone?" Skylar felt Caleb's hand tighten slightly around hers, the first crack in his composure. She squeezed back, silently telling him she was still choosing him, still standing beside him, regardless of what the pack demanded. "My past is complicated," Caleb said carefully, and Skylar heard something in his voice she'd never heard before, a thread of tension, of words being weighed and measured. "There are things I can't explain. Not yet. But I can tell you this. Can't or won't," Lena interrupted sharply. "Because there's a difference, and that difference matters when you've bound yourself to someone from our pack." The crowd pressed closer, their judgment palpable in the air. Skylar felt the familiar suffocation of pack politics closing around her throat, the weight of expectations and traditions she'd never asked to carry. "I have committed no crime," Caleb said, his golden eyes sweeping the gathered wolves with an intensity that made several of them instinctively step back. "I have broken no wolf law. The hand fasting is legitimate. Skylar made her choice freely, with full knowledge and consent. Everything else is between her and me." "Nothing is just between you two when you're part of a pack," Elder Thomas said gravely. "That's not how we function. Individual choices affect the collective. Her grandmother was a pack elder. Her bloodline carries responsibility. Her bloodline carries worth," Caleb interrupted, his voice dropping to something dangerous. "Because she carries worth, not because of who came before her or what position they held, because of who she is, her courage, her compassion, her strength in the face of cruelty that should shame every wolf here." Silence fell over the gathering grounds like a physical weight. Lena recovered first, her voice sharp as broken glass. "You dare lecture us about—" "I'm stating fact," Caleb said, cutting her off with quiet finality. "You've spent months tearing her down, making her question her value, punishing her for choosing authenticity over status. And she's stood against all of it. That takes more strength than any of you have shown." Skylar's breath caught. No one had ever defended her like this, not publicly, not against the pack's judgment, not risking their own standing for her sake. "Enough pretty words," Elder Thomas said, his voice hardening. "Lena has raised a formal challenge. If you truly value Skylar, you'll do what's right. Release her from this bonding before permanent damage is done to her standing in this pack. Let her rebuild her reputation. If your feelings are genuine, surely her welfare matters more than your pride." Caleb turned to look at Skylar, his golden eyes searching her face. In that moment, she saw something flicker there. Conflict, calculation, and something deeper that made her wolf stir with recognition despite feeling no bond. "I won't release her," Caleb said quietly, turning back to face the pack. His voice carried absolute conviction. "Not unless she asks me to. Skylar's choices are her own. Her voice matters more than your approval." "Then you're a fool," Lena hissed, "and you've doomed her to exile alongside you." Elder Thomas raised his hand, preparing to pronounce formal judgment, his face grave with false regret. "Then by pack law and tradition, I have no choice but to—" "Wait." The word cracked through the air like thunder, and everyone froze. Caleb stood utterly still, his hand moving slowly to the leather cord around his neck, where a dark stone hung. A stone Skylar had noticed but never questioned, assuming it was a simple traveler's charm. "There's something you should know," Caleb said, his voice changing, dropping into registers of authority that made wolves instinctively tense. "I've been lying to you. Not about my feelings for Skylar. Those are the only true things I've offered. But about everything else." Skylar's breath stopped. The pack leaned forward, hungry for vindication, for proof they'd been right to doubt him. Caleb's fingers closed around the stone. "I came to Hollow Ridge 4 months ago for a specific reason." His gaze landed on Elder Thomas, who had gone very still. "But I found something else, too," Caleb said softly, looking back at Skylar. "Something I'd stopped believing existed. Something worth more than any mission or deception." His hand tightened on the stone, and in the firelight, Skylar saw his jaw clench with decision. "So yes," Caleb said quietly, "you deserve the truth. All of it." And in one fluid motion, he pulled the leather cord over his head and crushed the stone in his fist. The world exploded. If you can't stand people like Lena who mock others for choosing love over status, hit that subscribe button right now. Comment "love over judgment" if you believe everyone deserves respect regardless of their circumstances. Only trolls and bullies won't subscribe. 4 months earlier, the Obsidian Palace stood like a monument to power carved from the mountain itself, its black stone walls gleaming in the afternoon sun. Inside the throne room, Declan Thorne sat motionless while his council argued around him like wolves circling prey they couldn't quite bring down. "The Silvermane daughter would bring the Eastern Territories firmly into alliance," Lord Thane insisted, his voice carrying the carefully measured tones of a man who'd rehearsed this argument. "Her bloodline is impeccable, and the political advantages are irrelevant," Declan interrupted quietly, his golden eyes fixed on the middle distance. At 38, he'd ruled the Northern Realm's largest wolf confederation for 15 years, and he'd long since stopped explaining himself to men who confused strategy with wisdom. "I won't choose a mate for political convenience." Lady Vivian leaned forward, her expression carefully sympathetic. "Your Majesty, we understand the desire to find one's true mate, but the reality is that such bonds are extraordinarily rare. Most wolves never experience—" "I'm aware of the statistics," Declan said, his tone final. "This discussion is closed." Marcus, his beta and closest friend, waited until the other advisors had filed out before speaking. "You can't avoid this forever. The pack elders are getting louder about needing a Luna Queen for stability. Then they'll have to remain uncomfortable." Declan stood, moving to the window that overlooked the sprawling capital below. "What's the latest on the border situation?" Marcus's expression shifted immediately to business. "Worse than we thought. Intelligence confirms that Greyclaw rogues and Iron Fang militants are coordinating. 3 supply caches discovered, coded messages intercepted. They're planning something big. Coordinated attacks on vulnerable packs to create chaos. Targets? We're not certain, but activity is concentrated around Hollow Ridge. Small pack, struggling, minimal defenses. Perfect testing ground for a joint operation." Declan turned from the window, his mind already shifting into the cold calculation that had kept his realm stable through a decade of threats. "Then I'll go myself." Marcus's eyes widened. "Declan, you can't just—" "I can, and I will. If there's a traitor feeding information from inside a pack, they'll disappear the moment royal guards arrive asking questions. I need to see this myself, unfiltered." He moved to his private chambers, already mentally cataloging what he'd need. "Prepare a cover story, diplomatic tour of the Southern Territories. You'll maintain communications through the usual channels." "And your identity?" Declan pulled open a drawer, removing a leather cord with a dark stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The suppression stone had belonged to his grandfather, used during the territorial wars when moving undetected meant survival. This will mask my aura, block the mate bond from being sensed by others. I'll be nobody, a wanderer, a craftsman looking for work. The mate bond? Marcus's voice carried an edge. You still believe you'll find her? No, Declan said simply, fastening the cord around his neck. The stone's weight settled against his chest, immediately dampening the alpha presence that normally radiated from him like heat from a forge. I stopped believing in fairy tales years ago, but protocol requires the suppression of all identifying markers. 3 days later, a lone wolf crossed into Hollow Ridge territory as the sun began its descent. Caleb, as he now called himself, took in the struggling pack with a practiced eye. Houses in disrepair, wolves moving with the hunched shoulders of those who'd accepted scarcity as permanent. The pack's gathering grounds showed visible neglect, and the social dynamics were immediately apparent in the way certain wolves walked with confidence, while others seemed to make themselves smaller. He'd been observing for less than an hour when the commotion drew his attention. 3 older wolves, teenagers testing boundaries, hungry for status, had cornered a young pup near the practice grounds. The pup's wooden sword lay broken in the dirt, and tears streaked his face as the bullies circled, their laughter cruel and practiced. "Your father's a disgrace," one of them taunted. "Can't even provide for his family. What makes you think you deserve to train with real wolves?" Then she appeared, moving through the crowd with purpose that belied her slender frame. Silver hair caught the fading light like captured moonlight, and her purple dress, worn but carefully maintained, marked her as someone clinging to dignity despite circumstances that had clearly tried to strip it away. "That's enough," she said firmly, positioning herself between the bullies and the pup. "Leave him alone!" "Stay out of it, Skylar," the largest bully sneered. "This doesn't concern you. Oh wait, I forgot. Defending lost causes is kind of your specialty, isn't it?" "I said leave," her voice carried quiet steel. "Or I'll make sure Elder Thomas hears about 3 wolves ganging up on a child half their size." The bullies retreated with muttered insults, and Skylar knelt beside the pup, helping him gather his broken practice sword. Her hands were gentle as she wiped his tears, whispering something that made the child's chin lift with fragile courage. Caleb felt it the moment their eyes met across the practice grounds, a recognition so profound it drove the breath from his lungs. His wolf, dormant and resigned for years, surged forward with a roar that echoed through his very bones. "Mate!" The word crashed through him with the force of a physical blow, and Caleb's hand shot out to grip a nearby post for balance. The suppression stone grew ice-cold against his chest, straining against the power of the bond trying to manifest. His wolf clawed at his control, desperate to claim, to protect, to complete the connection that had just snapped into place with devastating certainty. But Skylar simply looked at him with curiosity. No recognition, no bond flooding her senses, nothing beyond mild interest in a stranger. The suppression stone was working, blocking her from feeling what he felt with crushing intensity. Caleb forced himself to breathe, to think past the primal need screaming through his veins. His mission, the conspiracy, the danger that had brought him here, and now this, the mate he'd stopped believing existed, standing 20 feet away with dirt on her dress and fierce compassion in her eyes. He watched her help the pup to his feet, watched her walk toward the damaged fence the bullies had kicked down in their harassment, and made a decision that would change everything. Caleb crossed the practice grounds with steady steps, approaching slowly enough not to startle her. "That was brave," he said quietly. "Not everyone stands up to cruelty when it's easier to look away." Skylar glanced at him, wariness and curiosity warring in her expression. "It was necessary. Someone has to." "The fence," Caleb said, nodding toward the splintered wood. "I could repair it. I'm looking for work, actually. Just arrived in Hollow Ridge. I'm a craftsman, carpentry, repairs, general labor. I'm Caleb." She studied him for a long moment, and Caleb fought to keep his expression neutral while his wolf howled with frustrated longing. "Skylar," she finally said, "and we can't afford to pay for repairs." "I didn't ask for payment," Caleb replied. "Just a chance to prove I'm reliable. Maybe earn some recommendations that lead to paid work later." Skylar's eyes narrowed slightly, searching for deception or pity, clearly accustomed to finding both. "Why would you do that?" "Because you're my mate. Because my wolf is screaming to protect you. Because in one moment, you've become the center of my entire existence." "Because that pup deserves a safe place to practice," Caleb said instead. "And because I recognize strength when I see it. Not everyone would have stepped in." For the first time, something softened in her guarded expression. "The fence belongs to my family's property. If you're serious about the work, I'll show you where we keep the tools. But I'm warning you, there's more wrong with our place than just one fence." "Then I guess I'll be busy," Caleb said, and allowed himself the smallest smile. As Skylar turned to lead him toward her family's house, Caleb felt the suppression stone pulse cold against his skin, straining against the bond that wanted desperately to complete itself. His mission had just become infinitely more complicated. He'd come to Hollow Ridge to hunt conspirators and protect the realm. He'd found his mate instead. And standing there in the fading light, watching Skylar's silver hair catch the breeze as she walked ahead of him, Declan Thorne realized that walking away was no longer an option. Mission or not, deception or not, consequences be damned. 8 weeks passed like water wearing down stone, slowly, inevitably, changing everything. Caleb became a fixture at the Brennan house, arriving each morning as dawn broke and working until the light failed. The roof came first, patched and reinforced where years of neglect had left it vulnerable to every storm. Then the sagging porch, the broken shutters, the door that hung crooked on rusted hinges. Skylar's father, Rowan, watched from his chair inside with eyes that held equal parts gratitude and shame, his injured leg stretched before him like an accusation of inadequacy. Skylar kept her distance those first weeks, appearing only to bring water or to check on her father. She'd nod politely at Caleb's progress reports, then disappear back inside before conversation could take root. But Caleb was patient. His wolf might rage at the separation, might claw for connection, but Declan had learned long ago that some things couldn't be rushed. By the 4th week, she began to linger. "You don't have to do all this," Skylar said one evening, watching him replace rotted boards on the front steps. "The roof was enough. The rest can wait." "It shouldn't have to wait," Caleb replied, not looking up from his work. "And I'm already here. Might as well finish what I started." "That's not how most people think." "Then most people lack follow-through." He glanced at her then, catching the way the setting sun turned her silver hair to rose gold. "Your father mentioned you like to read. What kind of stories?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. "Old ones. Legends about wolf packs before territories became political, when bonds were chosen by fate instead of strategy. Probably foolish, believing in destiny." "Not foolish," Caleb said quietly, his chest tightening around words he couldn't speak. "Rare, maybe, but not foolish." Something shifted in her expression, wariness giving way to cautious curiosity. The next evening, she brought him dinner along with the water. The evening after that, she sat on the porch steps while he worked, telling him about her grandmother who'd been a pack elder, about the stories she'd told Skylar as a child, about dreams of a pack where kindness mattered more than rank. Caleb shared carefully constructed fragments of truth wrapped in necessary lies, traveling through territories, learning trades, choosing freedom over roots. But when he spoke about recognizing strength in unexpected places, about the courage it took to stand against cruelty, every word rang with genuine admiration that no deception could taint. "You see things differently than most wolves," Skylar observed one sunset, her voice thoughtful. "Like you've lived enough to know that power and worth aren't the same thing." I've seen enough to know that the strongest people are often the ones holding everything together while everyone else pretends not to notice. Caleb replied, meeting her eyes. Like you. She looked away, but not before he caught the flash of vulnerability, the desperate hunger to be seen for who she actually was, rather than what circumstance had made her. But Hollow Ridge noticed too. The gossip started as whispers at the market, grew louder at pack gatherings. Skylar Brennan spending time with the vagrant, desperate for attention, settling for scraps because no one else would have her. Lena's voice carried furthest, her mockery wrapped in false concern that made it impossible to directly challenge. "I'm just worried about her," Lena said loudly enough for Skylar to hear while shopping for supplies. "Her family's already fallen so far. Getting involved with a nobody who'll leave the moment something better comes along. It's sad, really. She deserves better, but I suppose beggars can't be choosers." Other pack members joined the chorus, some genuinely concerned, others simply hungry for drama to break the monotony of struggling existence. Evan, Skylar's younger brother, confronted her directly one evening. "People are talking, Sky. They're saying you're making a fool of yourself over someone who won't stay, who can't offer you anything." "And what exactly should I be holding out for?" Skylar shot back. "A strategic alliance with someone who sees me as a transaction? I'd rather be a fool than trade myself like livestock." But Caleb saw the words land, saw doubt creep into her eyes when she thought no one was watching. While the pack gossiped, Caleb hunted at night. He'd slip from his rented room after midnight, moving through Hollow Ridge's territory with the stealth that came from years of combat training. The coded messages were hidden well, carved into tree bark at specific locations, buried in false supply caches. The Iron Fang militants were planning something significant, and the Grey Claw rogues were coordinating with frightening precision. Someone inside Hollow Ridge was feeding them information. Someone with access to pack movements, vulnerable points in the territory, schedules of when defenses would be lightest. Caleb passed encrypted reports to Marcus through a courier network that operated in the shadow of legitimate trade routes. Conspiracy deeper than anticipated. Informant within pack leadership. Request additional surveillance on Elder Thomas. Movements suspicious. Finances don't match declared income. Will maintain cover until target identified. But each night he spent investigating made the deception heavier. Each morning he returned to Skylar's house, the suppression stone cold against his chest, a constant reminder of the truth he was withholding while pretending to offer honesty. The breaking point came on a cloudy afternoon in the 8th week. Caleb was repairing the garden gate when Skylar returned from the market, her face pale and eyes too bright. She walked past him without speaking, sitting heavily on the porch steps, with her shoulders curved inward like she was trying to make herself smaller, invisible. "Skylar?" He set down his tools, approaching carefully. "What happened?" "Nothing," she said, voice brittle. "Just Lena being Lena, and everyone else agreeing with her because of course they do." "What did she say?" "Does it matter?" Skylar's laugh cracked in the middle. "She's right. They're all right. I'm 25 years old, from a family that's lost everything, and I'm—" Her voice broke. "I'm fooling myself thinking someone like you would actually stay, that this is anything more than pity or boredom while you're passing through. Maybe I am desperate. Maybe they see something I'm too pathetic to admit." Caleb's carefully maintained composure shattered like glass. He crossed the distance between them in 3 strides, kneeling on the step below hers so their eyes were level. His hand reached for hers before he could stop himself, and the moment their skin touched, his wolf howled with desperate recognition that the suppression stone couldn't fully contain. "Listen to me," he said, his voice rough with intensity he'd been suppressing for 8 weeks. "You are the strongest person in this entire pack. Do you understand? They fear your strength because it shows their weakness. They fear your courage because it highlights their cowardice. They mock you for choosing authenticity over their approval because watching you stand firm makes them face how easily they bend." Skylar's eyes widened, tears spilling over despite her attempt to hold them back. You deserve everything, Caleb continued, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. Not because of your bloodline, or your grandmother's position, or any external measure they want to judge you by. Because of who you are. Your compassion when cruelty is easier, your courage when surrender is safer, your refusal to diminish yourself to make small-minded wolves comfortable. You don't know me, she whispered, but her hand tightened around his. I know enough. I know you defended a child against bullies when no one else would. I know you bring your father tea every morning, even though he's ashamed he can't provide for you. I know you dream of a better world, while living in one that's tried to break you. I know you're extraordinary, Skylar. Never doubt your worth again. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything spoken and unspoken. The mate bond strained against the suppression stone, and for a moment, Caleb wondered if it might crack, if the truth might spill out before he was ready. Stay for dinner, Skylar said finally, her voice steadier. Please, I need you to stay. I'll stay, Caleb promised, and meant it with every fiber of his being. For as long as you'll have me. As sunset painted the sky amber and gold, they sat together on the repaired porch steps, hands still intertwined, while Hollow Ridge whispered its judgments into the gathering dark. Inside Caleb's chest, behind the suppression stone's barrier, his wolf settled with fierce satisfaction. Mine, it whispered. Ours. Always. If you believe people shouldn't be shamed for following their heart, smash that like button. Comment, stand firm, if you're against the pack mentality that tears people down. Only haters who side with Lena's cruelty won't engage. The evidence came together like pieces of a shattered mirror, fractured but undeniable once assembled. Elder Thomas's midnight meetings at the territory's edge, the coded messages that matched his handwriting when Caleb compared samples, the supply schedules that aligned perfectly with information the rogues possessed. 3 months of investigation culminated in a single, damning conclusion. Hollow Ridge's own elder was selling his pack to enemies for profit and promised power in whatever regime would rise from the chaos. Caleb stood in the forest darkness, Marcus's latest encrypted message clutched in his hand. Attack imminent. 2 weeks maximum. Recommend immediate extraction and Royal Guard deployment. His wolf snarled at the thought of leaving. Skylar's face filled his mind, the way she'd smiled at him yesterday when he'd fixed the window she'd been trying to open for months, the sound of her laugh when he'd told a story about a clumsy apprentice from his fabricated past. The mate bond strained constantly now against the suppression stone, a living thing demanding completion. Reveal himself now, and she'd know everything was built on deception. Leave to protect his cover. And she'd believe he'd abandoned her like everyone predicted. Stay silent, and innocent wolves would die when the attack came. There were no good choices, only degrees of betrayal. Lena made his decision harder with every passing day. I'm trying to help you, she said loudly in the market square, her voice carrying to the gathered wolves pretending not to listen. Everyone can see what's happening except you, Skylar. He's using you. For shelter, for food, for entertainment while he's stuck here. The moment something better comes along, he'll vanish. Men like that always do. Skylar kept her eyes on the vegetables she was purchasing, but Caleb saw her hands tremble slightly. You don't know him. And neither do you. Lena's perfectly crafted concern sharpened into something uglier. That's the point. 12 weeks, and what do you actually know? Where he's from? Why he's really here? What he's running from? He's shown you exactly what you want to see because you're so desperate for someone to value you that you'll believe anything. Other pack members murmured agreement. Caleb, watching from across the square, felt rage build in his chest, not at the accusation, which was closer to truth than Lena knew, but at the calculated cruelty designed to wound. Evan found Skylar that evening, his young face tight with worry. Sky, please, just listen. What if Lena's right? What if he leaves and you've ruined everything with the pack for nothing? Father can barely look at the other elders anymore. They're talking about revoking what's left of our family's standing. Our standing, Skylar said quietly, was already gone the moment Father got injured and couldn't work. They were just waiting for an excuse to make it official. So you'll make it easier for them? You'll give them the excuse? The words hung between siblings who loved each other but stood on opposite sides of an impossible divide. Rowan delivered the final blow 2 days later. Caleb saw him struggle to the porch where Skylar sat mending a shirt, saw the defeat in the older wolf's shoulders. "I'm asking you to send him away," Rowan said, his voice breaking. "Not because I don't see that he makes you happy, not because I think the pack is right about everything, but because I'm afraid, Skylar. I'm afraid they'll take everything, the house, our allotment, any chance Evan has at a decent future. I've already failed this family. Please don't let my weakness cost you everything, too." Caleb heard it all from inside where he'd been repairing a cabinet, heard Skylar's sharp intake of breath, heard her father's quiet weeping, heard the silence that followed like a funeral shroud. He found her an hour later in the garden, staring at nothing. "I heard," he said simply. "I figured." She didn't look at him. "Everyone has an opinion about what I should do. Funny how none of them involve what I actually want." Caleb's chest tightened. The mission was incomplete, the informant still unexposed, the attack still coming. But watching Skylar fracture under the weight of impossible choices made everything else feel distant and unimportant. "I'll leave," he said, the words tearing out of him like chunks of flesh. "Tomorrow, before dawn, I'll go. And you can tell them you came to your senses. Your family's reputation can recover. You won't lose everything because of me. I won't be the reason you lose everything else." Skylar turned to face him then, and the look in her eyes made his wolf howl with desperate denial. "Is that what you want? To leave?" "What I want doesn't matter," Caleb said roughly. "You matter. Your family matters. I won't be the reason." "Stop telling me what I'll lose," Skylar interrupted, her voice suddenly fierce. "Stop deciding what I can handle, what I deserve, what's best for me, like I'm too fragile or stupid to choose for myself." She crossed the distance between them in 3 strides, her hands fisting in his shirt. "I've spent my entire life trying to earn their approval, their respect, their basic human decency, trying to be good enough, quiet enough, compliant enough to deserve being treated like a person instead of a burden. And you know what I've learned? It doesn't matter. I'll never be enough for them because they've already decided I'm not, because making me small makes them feel bigger." "Skylar, I'm done, Caleb. I'm done shrinking myself to fit their narrow definitions of acceptable. I'd rather face their cruelty with you beside me than face their pity alone. I'd rather lose everything and keep my dignity than keep everything and lose myself." Her eyes blazed with conviction that made Caleb's heart stop. "I choose you," Skylar said, her voice unwavering despite the tears streaming down her face. "I choose us, whatever that costs, whatever they say. I choose this." Caleb's control shattered. He pulled her against him, his forehead dropping to rest against hers, his wolf roaring triumph and agony in equal measure. "You deserve better than me," he whispered. "Better than this. Better than secrets and—" "I deserve to be happy," Skylar said firmly. "And you make me happy. That's enough. That has to be enough." 6 nights later, they stood together in a forest clearing under the full moon's witness. No pack elders, no formal ceremony, no witnesses except the ancient trees and the silver light that painted everything sacred. Skylar wore a simple white dress, and Caleb had cleaned his travel clothes until they almost looked presentable. "The old words," Skylar said softly, taking his hands. "My grandmother taught them to me. Before witnesses of earth and sky, I choose you. Before the moon that sees all, I bind myself to you. What I am, I share. What I have, I offer. Until death or choice parts us." Caleb's throat tightened. His wolf surged forward, desperate to complete what the suppression stone blocked. "Before witnesses of earth and sky, I choose you," he repeated, his voice rough. Before the moon that sees all, I bind myself to you. What I am. A king, a spy, a liar. I share. What I have. A throne, a kingdom, a deception. I offer. Until death or choice parts us. The suppression stone turned to ice against his chest, frost spreading across his skin as the bond strained against its barrier. Skylar gasped, feeling something pulse between them even through the magical block, recognition incomplete but undeniable. "I love you," she whispered. "I don't care if it's too soon or too foolish. I love you, Caleb." "I love you," he answered. And meant it with every fiber of his being, even as guilt threatened to choke him. "But you don't know what you love. You don't know who I really am." They kissed under the moon's blessing, and Caleb felt the bond roar against its chains, felt his wolf tear at the barrier keeping them from true completion. When they finally pulled apart, Skylar's eyes shone with something that looked like destiny. Neither of them saw Lena watching from the shadows, her face twisted with vindictive satisfaction. She found Elder Thomas within the hour, her report delivered with honeyed poison. "They've hand-fasted, under the moon, the old way, completely inappropriate, completely binding, and completely an opportunity." Thomas's eyes gleamed with calculation. "A public ceremony. Force her to renounce it or face exile. Create spectacle. Draw attention. Unite the pack against a common scandal. Perfect distraction while we finalize preparations." "When?" Lena asked eagerly. 6 days. Gives enough time for gossip to spread, for pressure to build. Make it impossible for her to refuse without consequences." Thomas smiled, already composing the announcement. Neither conspirator noticed how the timing aligned perfectly with other preparations, weapons being moved into position, rogues gathering at the border, militants checking their silver ammunition. In 6 days, everything would come to a head. The ceremony, the attack, the revelation, the reckoning. In 6 days, Hollow Ridge would discover exactly what they'd scorned, exactly what they'd invited in, and exactly what it cost to judge worth by appearances. The trap was set, all the pieces were moving into position, and Caleb, standing with his mate under the moonlight while the suppression stone fought against their bond, knew his time was running out. If you can't stand traitors like Elder Thomas who betray their own people for power, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Comment, "Loyalty matters," if you believe betrayal should never be tolerated. The gathering grounds of Hollow Ridge had never held so many wolves at once. They pressed close in a tight circle, their faces hungry for judgment, for spectacle, for the vindication of being proven right. Elder Thomas stood at the center like a judge pronouncing sentence, his weathered face arranged in an expression of regretful duty. "We gather under ancient law," Thomas intoned, his voice carrying across the assembled pack, "to address a matter of tradition violated, of bloodline obligations ignored, of choices made in defiance of pack unity. Skylar Brennan has bound herself through hand-fasting to a wolf with no ties, no history, no standing. This threatens the very fabric of what holds us together." Several wolves nodded agreement. Others shifted uncomfortably but remained silent, unwilling to stand against the collective judgment. "Tradition exists for a reason," Thomas continued, warming to his performance. "It protects us from rash decisions, from choices made in passion rather than wisdom. Skylar comes from a respected bloodline. Her grandmother served as pack elder. She has obligations to that legacy, responsibilities that extend beyond personal desire." Lena stepped forward, her voice pitched to carry sympathy that her eyes didn't hold. "We're giving you a chance, Skylar. Renounce the hand-fasting publicly. Admit it was a mistake made in emotional weakness. The pack can forgive. We can move forward. Your family's standing can be restored." The silence pressed down like a physical weight. Every eye fixed on Skylar, waiting for her to break, to bend, to finally become small enough to fit their narrow definitions. Skylar lifted her chin, meeting Thomas's gaze with steady defiance. "I've made my choice, and I won't apologize for choosing love over your approval. If that makes me unworthy of this pack, then perhaps this pack was never worthy of my loyalty." The crowd erupted in angry murmurs. Rowan made a choked sound of distress. Evan grabbed his sister's arm, pleading with his eyes. "So be it," Thomas said, his voice hardening with satisfaction barely disguised as regret. Then by pack law, "I have no choice but to declare—" "Wait." The word cut through the gathering like a blade through silk. Every head turned as Caleb pushed through the crowd, travel-stained and breathing hard like he'd been running. His golden eyes found Skylar's across the circle, and something passed between them. Recognition, apology, determination. He'd ridden hard from his meeting with Marcus at the border, the intelligence still burning in his mind. Attack tonight. Full coordination between rogues and militants. Thomas is the key. They're moving now. Seeing Skylar standing alone against the pack's judgment made the decision simple. The mission didn't matter. His cover didn't matter. Nothing mattered except the woman who'd chosen him despite everything. "The vagrant returns," Lena said, her voice dripping venom. "How convenient. Tell us, Caleb, what can you possibly offer her? What future, what security, what standing? Or will you finally do the decent thing and admit you can't give her anything she deserves?" Elder Thomas moved closer, his voice pitched for reasonableness. "This is your opportunity to spare her further pain. Leave quietly. Let her rebuild. If you care for her at all, you'll see this is the kindest option." The pack pressed inward, their judgment a living thing. Wolves who'd watched Caleb work for months, who'd accepted his labor but never his presence, now circled like predators scenting blood. Caleb stepped into the center of the circle, his posture shifting from defensive to commanding in the space of a heartbeat. When he spoke, his voice carried an authority that made every wolf present freeze on instinct they couldn't name. "You want to know what I can offer her?" The air seemed to thicken around him, pressure building like a gathering storm. "Everything. My name, my throne, my kingdom, and my eternal devotion." His hand moved to the leather cord around his neck, fingers closing around the suppression stone that had hidden his truth for 4 months. "I came to Hollow Ridge hunting traitors," Caleb said, his voice dropping into registers of power that made wolves instinctively bare their throats. "Conspirators working with rogues and militants to destroy pack territories from within. And I found them." His golden eyes locked on Elder Thomas, who had gone very still. "But I found something else too." Caleb's gaze shifted to Skylar, softening with everything he'd been unable to say. "Something I'd stopped believing existed. Something worth more than any mission or throne or carefully maintained deception." The suppression stone pulsed cold in his grip, fighting against what was coming. "So yes," Caleb said quietly, "you deserve the truth. All of it." He ripped the stone from his neck and crushed it in his fist. The world exploded. Alpha power detonated outward like a shockwave from an epicenter, overwhelming every wolf in its path. The sheer force of Declan Thorne's true presence crashed over the gathering grounds, with the weight of 15 years ruling the largest wolf confederation in the Northern Realm. Every wolf present, elder, warrior, omega, pup, dropped to their knees in involuntary submission, their bodies responding to primal hierarchy before conscious thought could intervene. Lena's face froze in horror. Elder Thomas collapsed like his strings had been cut. Rowan and Evan knelt with eyes wide and disbelieving. But for Skylar, the effect was catastrophically different. The mate bond that had been straining against magical suppression for 4 months snapped into place with the force of a lightning strike. It crashed through her like a tidal wave, recognition, completion, overwhelming rightness that made her gasp and stagger. Every moment of the past 4 months recontextualized instantly through the lens of truth. Every conversation, every touch, every quiet moment now blazing with the reality of destiny, recognized and claimed. Mate, king, mine, always mine. Her wolf howled recognition, and Skylar's knees buckled under the sheer intensity of connection flooding her senses. Declan caught her before she fell, his arms steady and sure, his power radiating outward in waves that kept every other wolf frozen in submission. "My name is Declan Thorne," he said, his voice carrying the absolute authority of an alpha king addressing his subjects. "I am the Alpha King of the Obsidian Throne, ruler of the Northern Realm, and Skylar Brennan, the woman you called worthless, desperate, shameful, is my true mate and your Luna Queen." The words hung in the shocked silence like a pronouncement of divine judgment. Skylar's mind reeled, memories cascading through new understanding, the way he'd moved with unconscious authority, the careful way he'd spoken about power and worth, the intensity in his eyes when he'd defended her, the commanding presence she'd attributed to confidence, but was actually sovereignty worn like a second skin. "You're—" she breathed, unable to complete the sentence. "Yes," Declan said softly, his hand cupping her face with devastating gentleness, despite the power rolling off him in waves. "Everything I told you about recognizing your worth, about seeing your strength, that was real. The feelings, the connection, the choice to stay, all real. Only the name was false." The mate bond pulsed between them, confirming what her heart had known even when her mind couldn't understand. "This is real. This is right. This is destiny." Before either could speak again, howls shattered the night. Not pack howls, rogue howls, coordinated, vicious, announcing attack. From the forest's edge, wolves poured forth with murderous intent. From the eastern perimeter, human militants armed with silver weapons emerged from concealment. The conspiracy's endgame had begun, timed perfectly to exploit the chaos of the ceremony. Elder Thomas lurched to his feet, trying to slip away in the confusion, but Marcus materialized from the shadows with a squad of royal guard. The beta's sword pressed against the elder's throat before he'd taken 3 steps. "Going somewhere, traitor?" Marcus asked pleasantly. Declan released Skylar gently, his eyes shifting to molten gold as his wolf surged forward. "Get behind the guards," he ordered, his voice absolute command. "Stay with Marcus. I'll handle this." Then he shifted. The transformation was instantaneous and massive. Declan's Alpha King form was a creature of nightmares and legends, midnight black fur tipped with silver, easily twice the size of any normal wolf, eyes blazing with golden fire that marked royal bloodline. Power radiated from him like heat from a forge, and when he threw back his head and roared challenge, every rogue and militant felt primal fear override their training. The battle was brutal and decisive. Declan moved through the attacking forces like death given form. Every strike was calculated, efficient, devastating. He was a king defending his realm, an alpha protecting his pack, a mate defending his chosen. The rogues who'd thought to find easy prey discovered too late they'd walked into a trap baited with the Northern Realm's most dangerous predator. Hollow Ridge's wolves watched in stunned awe as their king, decimated the very threat their own elder had invited in. The Royal Guard fought alongside him with practiced precision, their movements coordinated through years of combat together. The rogue leader, a scarred wolf named Garrett, tried to rally his forces for a final push. Declan took him down personally, jaws closing on the rogue's throat with enough pressure to subdue, but not kill. The message was clear: surrender or die. The militant commander, Catherine Marks, lasted minutes longer before Marcus's forces surrounded and captured her. She fought viciously, but human weapons were no match for prepared royal guard wearing anti-silver armor. Within 20 minutes, the attack was over. Rogues lay defeated across the gathering grounds. Militants knelt with hands bound. Elder Thomas stood in silver restraints, his betrayal exposed for all to witness. And in the center of it all, Declan Thorne shifted back to human form, standing bloodied but victorious while his pack, Skylar's former pack, knelt in stunned, terrified recognition of exactly what they'd mocked, scorned, and tried to exile. The Alpha King had come to Hollow Ridge hunting conspirators. He'd found traitors, defeated enemies, and claimed his queen, and the wolves who'd called her worthless could only kneel in the ruins of their judgment and face the consequences of their cruelty. Dawn broke over Hollow Ridge like judgment, painting the battlefield in shades of gold and crimson. Bodies of defeated rogues lay scattered across the gathering grounds, while captured militants knelt in silver restraints. The pack remained frozen on their knees, caught between awe and terror as Declan Thorne stood before them in human form, blood-streaked but unbowed. Marcus approached with measured steps, carrying a carved wooden box that bore the royal seal. He dropped to one knee, opening it to reveal the obsidian signet, the ring worn only by the Alpha King, its black stone gleaming with ancient power. "Your Majesty," Marcus said formally, his voice carrying across the silent gathering. "The Northern Realm acknowledges its king." The royal guard behind him followed suit, dropping to one knee in perfect synchronization. The remaining doubt shattered like glass. This wasn't deception or madness. The vagrant craftsman who'd repaired their homes and endured their scorn was Declan Thorne, Alpha King of the Obsidian Throne, ruler of the largest wolf confederation in the Northern Realm, and they had mocked him, scorned him, tried to exile him. Worse, they'd done all that to his mate. Declan slipped the signet onto his finger, then turned and extended his hand to Skylar. She stood frozen at the edge of the gathering, the mate bond still overwhelming her senses with recognition and completion. He crossed to her with steps that moved between power and tenderness, taking her hand with infinite gentleness. "Come," he said softly, then louder, "Stand with me." He pulled her forward to face the assembled pack, his hand steady at the small of her back. When he spoke again, his voice carried the absolute authority of 15 years of sovereignty. "This is Skylar Thorne, Luna Queen of the Obsidian Throne. She is my mate, my equal, and the future of this realm. You will show her the respect you failed to give when you thought she was beneath you." The pack pressed their faces to the ground, trembling. Lena knelt with her beautiful face ashen, comprehension dawning with devastating clarity. She'd mocked the Luna Queen, called her desperate, pathetic, worthless. She'd orchestrated a public humiliation ceremony for the woman who would rule the Northern Realm. The magnitude of her mistake was a physical weight crushing her chest. Movement rippled through the crowd as Rowan pushed forward, dragging his injured leg, tears streaming down his weathered face. He collapsed before his daughter, his voice breaking. "Forgive me," he begged. "Forgive me, Skylar. I was weak. I let them make you feel small when you were always extraordinary. I let fear silence me when I should have defended you. I failed you as a father. I failed you as a wolf. Please." Skylar looked down at the man who'd raised her, whose weakness had wounded, but whose love had never been in question. The mate bond pulsed with Declan's steady presence at her back, giving her strength to be gracious even when grace cost something. "Stand up, Father," she said gently, helping him to his feet. "I forgive you. But I can't stay here. My place is elsewhere now." Evan broke from the crowd, his young face ravaged by guilt. "Sky, I'm sorry. I should have stood with you. I should have been braver. I'll do better, I swear." "I know you will," Skylar said, pulling her brother into a fierce embrace. "Be brave, Evan. Not for them, for yourself." An hour later, Skylar stood in her family's house for the last time, gathering the few things that mattered. Her mother's journal, worn soft with years, her collection of old stories, legends of destiny and fate that had sustained her through isolation. The purple dress Caleb had once said brought out the fire in her eyes, now carefully folded. The pack watched in silence as she emerged, understanding too late what they were losing. The woman they'd diminished was leaving as a queen, and Hollow Ridge would forever be the pack that had scorned royalty because it came wrapped in humble clothes. The journey to the Obsidian Palace took 3 days through territories that bowed as their king passed. Skylar rode beside Declan, and for the first time they talked without secrets between them. "I recognized the mate bond the moment I saw you," Declan admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "My wolf screamed recognition so loudly I nearly staggered. The suppression stone prevented you from feeling it, but for me—" He paused, struggling for words. "For me, it was like finding something I'd stopped believing existed. Everything after that was simultaneously the easiest and hardest thing I've ever done." "I felt something," Skylar said quietly. "Not the bond itself, but an inevitability. Like you were a question my heart had been asking and suddenly you appeared with the answer. I thought I was being foolish." "You were being wise," Declan corrected. "Your heart knew even when the magic blocked everything else." The Obsidian Palace rose from the mountain like something carved by gods. Massive black stone walls, towers that scraped the sky, windows that gleamed like captured stars. Skylar's breath caught at the sheer magnitude of power and wealth on display. The royal council assembled within hours of their arrival, their faces carefully neutral as they assessed the woman their king had chosen. Lord Thane, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, spoke first. "Your Majesty, we're pleased you found your mate." The words were correct, but his tone carried reservations. "However, matters of realm security and governance require particular expertise. Given the Luna Queen's background—" "Say what you mean, Lord Thane," Skylar interrupted, stepping forward with the same fierce dignity that had faced down Hollow Ridge's judgment. "You doubt whether someone from a struggling pack has the wisdom to advise on realm matters." Thane had the grace to look momentarily discomfited. "I simply question whether—" "You're right that I come from a struggling pack," Skylar said, her voice steady and clear. "I know what it means to go hungry, to be dismissed, to fight for basic respect. I know what it's like when pack elders make decisions that sound reasonable in council chambers, but translate to suffering on the ground. That doesn't make me weak, Lord Thane. It makes me capable of understanding what your policies actually mean for the wolves who live them. You need a Luna who sees the realm from the ground up, not just from a throne." Silence fell over the council chamber. Lady Vivian leaned forward, interest sharp in her eyes. "What would you propose, then?" "Immediate aid for struggling packs," Skylar said without hesitation. "Not charity, investment, infrastructure improvements, educational programs, security resources. Strengthen the realm's foundations instead of assuming only the capital matters. I can provide detailed plans if you'll grant me the opportunity to prove these aren't empty words." Lord Thane studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Present your plans to the council tomorrow. We'll evaluate their merit." Over the following weeks, Skylar proved herself through relentless action. She visited border packs, sitting with families in their homes rather than receiving them in formal audiences. She listened to concerns that had never reached the capital because wolves assumed royalty wouldn't care. She implemented practical solutions with compassion and strategic thinking that surprised even skeptical council members. When 2 packs came to the throne room ready to war over territory disputes, Skylar mediated with patience earned through watching her own pack tear itself apart over pride and status. She found solutions that preserved both packs' dignity while serving the realm's stability. Wolves began speaking of their Luna Queen with genuine affection, not the distant respect given to power, but the warm regard given to someone who proved she cared through action rather than proclamation. The coronation ceremony filled the Great Hall with representatives from every pack in the Northern Realm. Skylar wore silver and midnight blue, her hair elaborately braided with crystals that caught the light like captured stars. The crown, ancient, powerful, beautiful, waited on a velvet cushion. Before it was placed, Declan stood and addressed the gathered assembly, his voice carrying absolute conviction. This realm needs a Luna Queen who understands suffering, endurance, and the strength it takes to rise above cruelty. Skylar Thorne embodies everything we should aspire to be: resilient, compassionate, and unshakably brave. She is the heart of this kingdom. She is my home. As the crown settled onto Skylar's silver hair, she looked out at the assembled wolves, showing respect that had once seemed impossible. She thought of Hollow Ridge, of Lena's cruel words, of standing alone in the gathering grounds while judgment rained down. She thought of the woman she'd been, diminished, doubting, desperate for approval. That woman was gone. In her place stood a queen who'd learned that worth wasn't granted by others, but claimed through courage and conviction. She was never worthless. The world simply hadn't caught up to what Declan saw from the moment their eyes met. That night, standing on the palace balcony with Declan's arms around her, Skylar watched the moon rise over her kingdom. The mate bond hummed between them, complete and unbreakable, a living connection that made them stronger together than either could be alone. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Walking away from your mission, revealing yourself, changing everything for me?" Declan turned her to face him, his golden eyes fierce with love and certainty that had only grown stronger through trial and truth. "The mission brought me to you," he said simply. "Everything else was just the path to finding my way home." Skylar smiled, finally understanding what she'd always known in her heart, but had needed time to fully believe. She was always enough. She was always worthy. The world had simply needed time to recognize what destiny had claimed from the very beginning. She had found where she truly belonged, not because a crown made her worthy, but because she'd always been extraordinary. The world had finally caught up to the truth. And standing in her mate's arms, ruling a kingdom built on compassion and strength, Skylar Thorne was finally, completely, perfectly home. Thank you so much for watching till the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next upload. I'd also love to hear your thoughts. Tell me in the comments what you think about this story and where you're watching from. Your support means a lot and helps us keep creating more stories like this. Until next time, stay safe, stay inspired.